The most terrifying war in human history did not begin with explosions or gunfire, but with silence, fear, and slow-growing hatred. In the years before World War II, millions of people went to sleep believing peace still existed, while beneath the surface, anger and desperation were spreading like a disease. Nations were broken after World War I, economies collapsed, and ordinary people felt abandoned and humiliated. Out of this darkness emerged leaders who promised strength, pride, and revenge, and people followed them not because they were evil, but because they were afraid. When the first bombs finally fell in 1939, the world realized too late that this war would not be fought only by soldiers. It would consume entire populations, erase cities, and turn civilization itself into a weapon. Germany, crushed by defeat and economic disaster, became fertile ground for radical ideas. Adolf Hitler rose to power not by force at first, but through speeches that blamed minorities, foreigners, and imagined enemies for every hardship. He convinced millions that cruelty was justice and obedience was patriotism. Laws slowly stripped people of rights, neighbors turned against neighbors, and violence became normal. When Germany invaded Poland, it was not a traditional invasion. Tanks smashed through defenses, aircraft screamed overhead, and civilians fled in terror as cities collapsed around them. This new form of warfare moved faster than fear itself, and within weeks, Poland was destroyed. Soon after, Denmark, Norway, the Netherlands, Belgium, and France fell one by one, shocking the world and proving that no nation was untouchable. For civilians, the war was not a distant event reported on the radio. It arrived at their doorsteps. In London, nights became endless hours of terror as German bombers crossed the sky. Families crowded into underground shelters, listening to explosions tear apart their neighborhoods. Children learned to sleep through sirens, and parents learned to accept that survival was a matter of luck. Across the Channel, Allied bombers turned German cities into seas of fire. Entire neighborhoods were swallowed by flames so intense that oxygen vanished from the air, suffocating people in the streets. There were no winners in these skies, only burning cities and shattered lives. On the Eastern Front, the war descended into pure horror. When Nazi Germany invaded the Soviet Union, it unleashed the largest and deadliest conflict ever fought. Soldiers froze to death in winter storms, starved in ruined villages, and drowned in mud soaked with blood. At Stalingrad, men fought for every staircase and hallway, sometimes with no weapons left, attacking each other with knives or bare hands. Corpses froze solid where they fell, and living soldiers climbed over them without pause. Survival meant abandoning mercy, and even victory tasted like death. Millions died for a few blocks of rubble, and the ground itself became a mass grave. While Europe collapsed, the Pacific erupted in its own nightmare. Japan's attack on Pearl Harbor pulled the United States into the war, and American soldiers soon found themselves fighting in jungles, islands, and oceans far from home. Battles were brutal and personal, often fought at close range. Japanese soldiers were taught never to surrender, and civilians were frequently forced to die alongside them. In China, entire cities were subjected to unimaginable cruelty, with mass killings, torture, and violence against civilians. In this war, humanity was stripped away until only survival remained. Yet the most terrifying crime of World War II did not happen in the chaos of battle, but in carefully organized silence. Across Europe, Jewish families were rounded up using lists, trains, and schedules. They were told they were being relocated or put to work. Instead, they were sent to camps designed for extermination. Upon arrival, families were torn apart in seconds. Children were separated from parents, the elderly were led away, and the rest were marked with numbers, no longer considered human. Gas chambers disguised as showers filled with poison, and within minutes, thousands were dead. Their bodies were burned day and night, smoke rising endlessly into the sky. This was not madness or rage. It was systematic, efficient, and deliberate. Over 6 million Jews were murdered, alongside millions of others, while much of the world looked away. By 1945, the world was exhausted, but the war delivered one final horror. The United States dropped atomic bombs on Hiroshima and Nagasaki, unleashing destruction beyond anything humanity had ever seen. In seconds, Entire cities vanished. People were vaporized where they stood, leaving only shadows burned into walls. Those who survived faced a slow death from radiation, illness, and pain that lasted decades. The war ended shortly after, but peace came too late for millions who were already gone. When Allied soldiers finally liberated the concentration camps, even hardened veterans were unprepared for what they found. Skeleton-thin survivors stared with empty eyes, surrounded by piles of corpses and mass graves. Some soldiers cried. Others became sick. The truth of what had happened could no longer be denied. The world asked how such horror was possible. The answer was terrifyingly simple. It happened because hatred was allowed to grow, because lies were believed, because people obeyed without questioning, and because silence became complicity. World War II was not just a fight between nations. It was a warning written in blood. It proved that civilization is fragile, that ordinary people can commit extraordinary evil, and that the line between order and collapse is thinner than anyone wants to believe. This war did not end in 1945. Its scars remain in cities, families, and memories. And the most frightening truth of all is that the same forces that caused it still exist, waiting for fear, anger, and silence to give them life once again.